touch me again.
Sir.
Get the out of here.
No.
Touch me again.
Not all cops who take the oath to serve and protect do what they are supposed to.
I've done nothing wrong. Am I being detained?
Get on the ground, James!
Detained.
Some go out of their way to commit the very crimes they are meant to stop.
Stay out here.
From helping convicted felons to planting evidence in innocent people's vehicles, here are some instances where corrupt cops were caught using their power unfairly. Without making you wait anymore, let's start with the first corrupt cop. Number 1. Planting evidence. February 15, 2018. Deputy Zach Wester pulled over a 52-year-old woman for her flickering brake lights. Acting friendly, Teresa Odom thought she was dealing with a nice cop, unaware of his true intentions. The deputy informed Miss Odom that a K-9 unit was on the way to search her vehicle, but if she didn't want to wait, she could consent to him searching it instead. Confident that there was nothing suspicious in her car, Miss Odom agreed without hesitation. Deputy Wester asked her to step outside and wait by the patrol car. Before searching her vehicle, he returned to his car and lingered there for a while. Why? To get something he can plant. If you look closely, you can see him slipping on his gloves with a small bag hidden in his hand. During the search, knowing his body camera was on, he pretended to find the bag among her belongings. He then confronted Miss Odom, who confidently insisted the bag wasn't hers. The deputy conducted a roadside chemical test, claiming it confirmed the bag contained meth. He arrested Miss Odom for possession of illegal drugs. This wasn't the first time Deputy Wester had found drugs during a stop. His unusually high number of drug arrests prompted authorities to investigate. They discovered over 100 cases where he had falsely accused people of drug possession. Although the charges against these innocent people have been dropped and Wester has been sentenced to 12 years in prison, the damage to those 120 people's records remains. People like him are a disgrace to the authorities, abusing their power and causing innocent people to suffer. Number 2. Badge show-off. November 12, 2022, a deputy from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office pulled over a golf cart outside a residential area. The golf cart had no license plate or appropriate tags, giving the deputy every right to issue a citation. However, when he approached the couple in the cart, the situation took an unexpected turn. The woman in the cart was Chief of Police Mary O'Connor from the Tampa Police Department. Flashing her badge, she smiled and suggested that the deputy let them go. She acted as if her position entitled her to special treatment. Surprisingly, the deputy decided to let them go, and O'Connor handed him her card, telling him to contact her if he ever needed anything. What O'Connor thought was a friendly interaction backfired when a video of her flashing her badge to avoid a ticket surfaced. O'Connor resigned as chief following this scandal, saying she now realized how her acts could be interpreted as wrong, even though it wasn't her intent. It's good that she was held accountable before she could get away with something bigger simply because she was the chief. Number 3. Locked in the back seat. Police officers showed up at the intersection of Denver Street and Claremont Avenue in Bay Park on August 14, 2023 to apprehend several suspects in connection with an auto theft investigation. The female suspect also had a bench warrant out for her arrest. Officer Anthony Hare quickly arrested her and began transporting her to the police station. During the ride, the woman started asking Officer Hare personal questions, like if he was single or married. Their conversation, captured on Hare's body cam, took a turn when the detainee suggested she was ready to have some fun with him. Hare warned her not to say such things, reminding her that everything was being recorded. Shortly after her proposition, Officer Hare turned off his body camera and pulled the car onto a dark road. Over 20 minutes later, Hare radioed his supervisor, claiming he had accidentally locked himself in the back seat and needed assistance. When the supervisor arrived, he found Hare and the woman in the back seat of the police cruiser. Hare claimed he went to check on the woman because he believed she was having a medical emergency. Later, he insisted he didn't have any sexual contact with her and even reenacted how he got locked up for investigators. However, traces of semen found on his belt cast serious doubt on his story. Following these events, Officer Hare resigned from his position. Well, as an officer officer, if he doesn't have better control over his urges, he should never become a cop again. Number 4. Drunk sergeant. On March 14, 2024, officers from the Miami Police Department spotted a white Mercedes speeding and running red lights. When they initiated a traffic stop, they were surprised to find Sergeant Andrea Smith from their department behind the wheel. Sergeant Smith was asked to step out, and the officers immediately smelled alcohol on her breath and noticed her bloodshot, watery eyes and slurred speech. Wearing a dress and heels, she agreed to perform a sobriety test. But before it could start, another sergeant instructed the officers to call it off and just detain her. Despite claiming she was sober and not crazy, her behavior in the back seat of the police car told a different story. She oscillated between shock, threatening to sue, falling asleep, and boasting about her financial success. When taken to jail, she told the officers that if they could take her, a sergeant, to jail, they could take anyone, and demanded they stop treating her like an animal. Following her arrest for driving under the influence, the Miami Gardens Police Department terminated her. Sergeant Smith pleaded not guilty to the charges, and her trial against the police department is ongoing. Should the police have conducted the sobriety test to be sure she was drunk? Was it prejudice or an attempt to cover up for a fellow officer? Without the test, she can now claim in court that she wasn't drunk, and the officers have no concrete evidence to prove it. Regardless, this incident has ended her 10-year career with the Miami Gardens Police. Number 5. Mechanic lawsuit. This mechanic had a tough day at work when a police officer, Krista McCabe, showed up responding to a complaint about people messing with an employee's car. The mechanic, Roland Edger, explained to Officer McCabe that he was fixing a customer's car. McCabe asked him to take a break and requested his ID. Edger refused, suggesting that she call the owner of the car to resolve the situation. During their conversation, another officer, Cameron Perilat, showed up and things escalated. In the middle of his response, Officer Perilat seized Edger from behind, pushed him against the car, and handcuffed him. All this happened because Edger refused to give his ID, which is his legal right. While unlawfully detaining Edger, Officer Perilat said, "You don't understand the law." Edger kept trying to explain, but the officers, drunk with power, wouldn't listen. They told his stepson that Edger was going to jail for refusing to follow their orders, claiming it was breaking the law. Edger was later cleared of any wrongdoing, but he didn't let this slide. He sued both officers. When the court reviewed the footage of the incident, they did something very satisfying. They reversed the officers' qualified immunity. This means the state won't cover the lawsuit costs. The officers will have to pay themselves. If this happens more often, maybe police officers would be more careful about abusing their powers. Number 6. Felon helper. A New Mexico sheriff showed up drunk at a SWAT standoff, trying to take control and order the team to call off the raid, insisting he could bring the suspect in himself. Sheriff James Lujan was asked to leave the scene, but he attempted to take over, even claiming he had been in contact with the suspect. His interference with the search warrant raised suspicions that he might be involved with the criminal. A week later, police showed up at his office with a search warrant for his phone. While reading the warrant, Lujan handed his phone to a deputy, arrogantly ignoring the cameras recording this clear obstruction of justice. Although he handed over 2 phones after some resistance, the cops later realized neither was the one he had been using during the SWAT standoff. Failing to comply with the search warrant and physically resisting, the Espanola Police Department returned with an arrest warrant for the sheriff. It turned out that Lujan was helping his friend, a convicted felon, evade the police. He was charged and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Kudos to that first officer who wasn't intimidated by the sheriff and stood her ground along with the officers involved to bring this criminal helper cop behind bars. Number 7. Speedy chief. A police officer on routine patrol clocked a Dodge Charger going over 95 miles per hour in a 35 zone. The officer decided to pull over the speedy car and was surprised to find Deputy Chief Michael Yarbrough behind the wheel. The officer chuckled a bit when he recognized him. After pulling over Yarbrough, who was driving a car belonging to the sheriff's office, the officer contacted another person to inform them about the situation. He mentioned that Yarbrough didn't have his lights activated and wasn't on any police mission. He had simply decided to speed in a powerful car. The person on the other end of the call told the officer it was his traffic stop and his call on what to do. The officer decided to write a citation for Yarbrough, but didn't include the $200 fine and advised him to drive safely. After reviewing the footage of the incident, the sheriff suspended Yarbrough for 40 hours without pay. Well, by accepting the consequences of his actions and not abusing his position, Yarbrough managed to keep his job. Number 8. Innocent man. man. Now we have a deputy harassing an innocent man for no proper reason, but this man is no random person. He knows his rights. The deputy pulls him over while he is pushing his bike towards an apartment. When the man asks the officer why he stopped him, the officer first claims it's because he has no flashlight. The man, James Gresham, responds that he actually does have a flashlight. The officer then escalates the situation, ordering Gresham to get on the ground and threatening to tase him. Gresham complies, repeatedly stating that he has done nothing wrong. Gresham was only being detained because he decided to leave a bonfire where the officer had shown up, which is completely legal. Despite Gresham being on his knees, the officer continues to yell at him to get on the ground. The deputy then handcuffs him, claiming he is being arrested for resisting, even though the video clearly shows Gresham complying. James keeps asking for a supervisor, knowing he committed no crime and was being unlawfully detained. He mentions all the amendment rights the officer is violating. Surprisingly, instead of condemning the deputy's actions, the sheriff defends them, saying the deputy did nothing wrong and was following guidelines for aggressively pursuing those who choose a life of crime over quality of life. But the internet knows better. What this deputy did was unlawful and misconduct. Number 9, stealing. Florida Sheriff's Deputy John Brayman was caught on his body camera stealing money from people he had just arrested. He had stolen it multiple times, but in this one instance, he forgot to turn off his body camera. The footage clearly showed him taking out $200 bills, tossing them in the trunk, and putting the wallet in an evidence pouch. After the video was released, Brahman resigned from his post, and a trial for felony charges against him began. Throwing away your whole career for a couple of $100? That's just pathetic. Number 10, unnecessary force. After fleeing from shoplifting at Walmart, the suspect's van was stopped about 50 yards from the parking lot. The suspect can be seen complying with the arresting officer. However, Officer Daniel Starks, who the suspect had fled from, took the fleeing attempt as a blow to his ego. When Starks arrived, he pushed the suspect twice into the car and then unlawfully used his stun gun on him, making him fall to the ground. Starks then pointed the stun gun at the suspect again, threatening to use it if he didn't get up. Breaching the fourth standard, this unnecessary use of force on a compliant suspect was reported by fellow officers to a supervisor, culminating in Starks' dismissal. The FBI got involved, as investigating civil rights violations is a priority for them. Starks pleaded guilty to the charges, and his abuse of power could result in up to 10 years in jail and a $250,000 fine. This is a case of justice being served correctly. Number 11, learn de-escalation. While driving his company car, Thomas Broculio encountered a man blocking a right turn. He honked his horn and outstepped off-duty cop Alan Ganter. Ganter flashed his badge and yelled that a right turn wasn't allowed there. Broculio, familiar with the roads, pointed out that the sign said "No turn on red" and suggested Ganter would know that if he wasn't on his phone. Ganter then threatened Broculio with a ticket for honking. In response, Broculio asked for his badge number. At that moment, Ganter did something unacceptable. He punched Broculio in the face and walked away, asking Broculio if he was trying to get arrested, but Broculio didn't back down. He told Ganter, "You're the one going to jail for assaulting a civilian," and promptly called 911 to press charges. When the police arrived, Ganter acted surprised and questioned how Broculio could press charges. However, with everything recorded on the dashcam, Ganter didn't stand a chance and was ultimately charged with assault. Did he really think punching a civilian for no reason would work in his favor? Number 12. Drunk Chief. Bradley Beach, Police Chief. Leonard Guida arrived at the scene where officers were dealing with a suspected DUI driver. Instead of assisting, he pulled aside a sergeant and began ridiculing him for the jacket he was wearing. Trying to avoid making a scene, the sergeant removed his jacket, but Guida kept ordering him to come to talk. The sergeant refused. When Guida approached again, trying to pull him away, the sergeant had enough. He pushed Guida against the hood of a patrol car, saying, "Don't touch me." After letting Guida go, the sergeant warned him to leave or risk being arrested. Guida responded by telling the sergeant he was relieved of duty and suspended. The sergeant replied that he would go home and refused to engage further. Later, the sergeant was reinstated, while for Chief Guida, this incident marked the end of his career. He was forced to retire. Although showing up drunk and harassing an officer, he should have faced more severe consequences. Number 13, tinted windows. An officer pulled over a senator's daughter for having tinted windows. It turned out these two were no strangers. Officer Phil Kiesnowski and the senator's daughter were former former classmates. After discussing how her tint was dark enough to warrant a ticket, the conversation became more casual. Kiesnowski expressed his disagreement with his department's policy on tinted windows and attempted to mute his body cam mic. He told her he would give her a ticket, but revealed that his department already had her on a watch list due to her dark tint and would write her a ticket whenever they got the chance. He even suggested she call her dad to make the problem go away. This attempt to mute his camera and encourage someone to use their influence to change a policy cost him his job. He was fired immediately. If you know someone personally, it's probably best not to discuss your corrupt ideas out loud and not on camera. Number 14, disturbing. On June 10, 2022, Christian Glass called 911 for help because his car was stuck on the road. During the call, it was clear that Glass was experiencing a mental health crisis, mentioning things like seeing a skinwalker and expressing love to the responder. When the police arrived, instead of handling the situation with care, they ordered Glass to step out of the car. Already in distress, Glass was terrified that they would fire at him if he got out. Despite repeatedly expressing his fears and mentioning a mental hospital, the officers continued to demand that he exit the vehicle. While some officers tried to speak to him gently and Glass responded non-threateningly to them, they still couldn't persuade him to get out. When Glass grabbed a knife, the situation escalated. An officer standing on the hood of the car fired at the Glass 5 times. It's heartbreaking that a man who called the police for help ended up losing his life at their hands. Andrew Buen, the officer who opened fire, now faces charges of second-degree murder. Number 15, pulled away. Police Sergeant Christopher Poulis arrived at a scene where a suspect was resisting, though not threateningly, getting into the back of a police car. Poulis quickly approached the suspect and began yelling at him with pepper spray in hand, even going so far as to threaten to remove his soul from his body. While the other officers watched Poulis use unnecessary force against the handcuffed man, one brave female officer intervened. She pulled Poulis back by his belt to prevent further escalation. In response, Poulis turned around, put his hand around her throat, and pushed her against a vehicle. Following this incident, Poulis retired from the police force. However, he now faces assault charges and several others. Kudos to the woman officer for being brave and doing what her partners couldn't. Number 16, extra milk. This video will make you sick to your stomach. A Farmington Police School resource officer followed a 6th grade student with known behavioral issues for 30 minutes. The incident began when the 11-year-old reportedly took more milk than she was supposed to, causing chaos in the cafeteria. As the girl wandered in and out of the building, she brushed past the principal and assistant principal. The officer decided to arrest her on counts of assaulting them. Scared and just wanting to go home, the child started to struggle. Instead of calming her down, the officer began roughing her up. Her screams echoed outside the school, while the officer, showing no compassion, continued to use excessive force. At one point, someone from the school told the officer that she wasn't a threat to anyone and to at least let her stand up. But Officer Zachary Christensen didn't listen, and honestly, the school administration should have intervened better. After the video was released, the officer resigned, and a year later, he was charged with child abuse. How inhumane do you have to be to rough up a scared kid like this? Number 17, entitled Misogynist. 2 police officers pulled over a police chief for having dark tint and a ghost tag, and he wasn't happy about it. Zebulon Police Chief Jonathan Hemphill immediately got out of his car and started complaining about being stopped, acting as if he were above the law. His behavior became even more disrespectful when a female officer got involved. He made misogynistic remarks, but the officer wasn't intimidated by his hostility. She confronted him, firmly stating that she was just doing her job and explaining the reasons for the stop. When the officer once again tried to speak to him calmly, Hemphill continued to be hostile. If this is how he behaves with cameras on, one can only imagine how he acts when there are no cameras around. Number 18, patience lost. The Loveland Police Department arrested a 56-year-old woman and took her to the hospital for a medical checkup. Throughout, she continuously yelled profanities and spat on nurses and officers. Officers maintained prolonged professionalism and patience. However, while handcuffed and sitting in the examination interrogation room, she spat on Officer Maranto once again. He snapped and struck her in the face. He was immediately placed on administrative leave, and when the video surfaced online, the Loveland Police Department fired him. Though his action was a reaction to provocation, and some might argue the woman deserved it, as a police officer, Maranto's behavior was unjustifiable. He failed to de-escalate the situation and used unnecessary force. The career of this cop came, but let me know, do you guys think it was justified? Number 19. Bragging misconduct. Watch this inhumane officer not only admit to starting violence against protesters in 2020, but also boast about it. This happened during protests against police brutality. This cop just proved why these protests were necessary in the first place. As he mentions hitting protesters with his car, another officer stops him, walks away, and then returns to tell him that his body camera is on. Suddenly, Sergeant Clifton McHale changes his tune, claiming he didn't hit anyone, but his true actions were already recorded. What's even more disturbing is that instead of confronting him about what he did, his colleagues helped him avoid further trouble. These are the people who are supposed to protect and serve. Surprisingly, this sergeant only faced a 10-day suspension. Number 20. Sheriff versus sergeant. Watch as this sheriff and city sergeant get into a little brawl. Each tries to exert their authority over the other, trying to get their own way. They even throw out some curse words in the mix. Well, that's a wrap on corrupt cops acting unlawfully and showcasing how power and ego can corrupt. These stories remind us that all officers need to remember they are not above the law. Which one of these cops do you think should face the most severe consequences? Or do you have your own story of corrupt cops? Share with us in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and hit the little bell so you get notified when we post new content just for you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.